My once doting and loving husband now ignores our daughter and snapped that life would be easier without her. I'm devastated and don't know what to do. My story with my husband, 38M, reads like a romance novel that's lost its final chapters. I'm 42F, and we've shared nearly 16 years of what once seemed like a fairy tale, with a decade spent as husband and wife. Our paths crossed in an almost serendipitous way. He was passing through my city for work, a temporary visitor who would become my permanent anchor. After months of long-distance calls that made my heart flutter, filled with laughter and my not-so-subtle hints, he finally gathered his courage and confessed his love. From that moment on, we've been inseparable, our lives intertwined like two vines growing stronger together. The early years were nothing short of magical. After 3 years of dating, he took the leap of faith and moved in with me, leaving behind everything he knew to build a life together. My family welcomed him with open arms, embracing him as if he'd always been part of our clan. Fortune smiled upon us when he landed his dream position as a high school history teacher at a nearby school, a role that seemed tailor-made for his passionate and nurturing nature. Throughout our relationship, he has been the epitome of a loving partner, attentive, considerate, and always going above and beyond to ensure our happiness. His thoughtfulness and devotion made me fall deeper in love with him with each passing day, even after 16 years together. His sweet gestures and tender care never failed to make my heart skip a beat, as if we were still in those early days of courtship. That's precisely why his recent transformation has left me completely shattered, questioning everything I thought I knew about our life together. The change has been so profound, so unexpected, that sometimes I find myself wondering if I'm living in some cruel alternate reality where my loving husband has been replaced by a stranger wearing his face. Our journey into parenthood began almost 5 years ago with the birth of our daughter, whom I'll call Dawn, a name that perfectly captured the new light she brought into our lives. My pregnancy was a time of pure magic and anticipation, during which my husband's natural tenderness blossomed into something even more beautiful. He treated me like the most precious porcelain, his love radiating through every gentle touch and concerned glance. Each morning began with his soft kisses on my growing belly, each evening ended with his whispered conversations with our unborn child. Though the delivery had its heart-stopping complications that tested our strength, the moment we finally held our daughter in our arms, the world crystallized into perfect clarity. Every struggle, every fear melting away in the warmth of her first cry. Those first precious weeks were a testament to my husband's unwavering dedication and love. He transformed into a protective guardian, adamantly insisting on shouldering all household responsibilities so I could focus entirely on Dawn and my recovery. With the precision of a master conductor, he orchestrated a seamless support system, coordinating with my parents and sister who would drop by regularly to help, ensuring we were never overwhelmed. During Dawn's infancy, his devotion showed in countless ways, from the anxious calls to my parents during his lunch breaks, his voice trembling with concern and love for our little girl, to the late-night diaper changes he insisted on handling so I could rest. But as the years began to unfold, subtle changes started creeping in like shadows at dusk. His attention toward Dawn gradually waned, replaced by an increasing preoccupation with work that seemed to consume more and more of his emotional energy. I adore Dawn with every fiber of my being. She's the light of my life, my heart walking around outside my body, but I must admit she's a force of nature, spirited and strong-willed beyond her years. Our days have become a whirlwind of preventing accidents, managing mischief, and navigating through storms of tantrums that can shake the foundations of our home. It's exhausting, yes, but it's also part of the beautiful chaos of parenthood, a chaos that used to bring laughter to our lives but now seems to drain the life from my husband's eyes. What truly breaks my heart, what keeps me awake in the dark hours of night, is watching my once energetic husband become a shadow of himself. The spark that used to dance in his eyes has dimmed to a barely visible flicker, his shoulders seem permanently weighted down as if carrying an invisible burden. While he still maintains his sweetness toward me, there's an invisible wall growing between us, built brick by brick with unspoken words and avoided glances. Our once passionate intimacy, which used to make me feel like the most desired woman in the world, has completely vanished, leaving behind a cold void that echoes with the memory of what we once had. The most heart-wrenching change has been in his relationship with Dawn, a transformation that cuts deeper than any physical wound could. Just yesterday, during what should have been a normal family breakfast, she was bubbling with excitement, her little face animated with joy as she eagerly shared details about her favorite show. Her eyes sparkled with childish enthusiasm, her hands gesturing wildly as she tried to capture her father's attention. Instead of engaging with her animated storytelling, instead of offering even the smallest acknowledgement of her presence, he wordlessly placed his cereal in the fridge and walked away as if she were nothing but empty air. The light in Dawn's eyes flickered out like a candle in the wind, her expression crumpling as she turned to me, her tiny voice trembling with confusion and hurt as she asked why Papa was ignoring her. That moment carved a permanent scar in my heart, a wound that bleeds afresh every time I remember it. The burden of parenting has become increasingly one-sided, a weight that grows heavier with each passing day. Every morning, I'm the one who rises with the sun, my body aching but determined, to dress and feed Dawn, navigate through rush hour traffic to her school, only to repeat the journey in reverse hours later. Every doctor's appointment, dentist visit, play date, and school event falls squarely on my shoulders like an invisible cross I must bear alone. The only time my husband seems to acknowledge Dawn's existence is during that brief window between her return from school and dinner preparation, a fleeting moment of interaction that feels more like a duty than the loving father-daughter relationship they once shared. Our attempts to discuss this growing chasm have all ended in heated arguments, each more painful than the last. He builds walls of defensiveness around himself, brick by brick, never offering any real explanation for his withdrawal, his words becoming sharper and more cutting with each confrontation. But it was during our most recent clash that everything reached a devastating breaking point. I was preparing to take Dawn to the babysitter. Yet another task that should have been shared between us but wasn't. What began as a simple discussion quickly spiraled into a maelstrom of accusations and hurt feelings, words flying between us like poisoned arrows. I'll admit some of my words were sharp enough to draw blood, born from months of frustration and heartache, but what he said next stopped time itself. In the midst of his tirade about all he'd done for our family and how difficult everything was for him, his voice rising with each word, his face flushed with anger, I couldn't help but interrupt. "How can it be so hard for you?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of fury and desperation, tears threatening to spill from my eyes, when I'm the one doing everything for Dawn. His response was like a thunderbolt that shattered our world, words that I never thought I'd hear from the man who once counted Dawn's fingers and toes with wonder. If it weren't for her, things wouldn't be this hard. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum that seemed to suck all the air from the room. The words hung in the air like poison gas, suffocating us both with their weight and implications. Before I could process the magnitude of what he'd said, before I could find my voice to respond, he muttered something about needing air and disappeared for a walk, leaving me standing there, frozen in shock, my world crumbling around me. Since that moment, my world has been spinning off its axis, tumbling through a darkness I never knew existed. That single sentence, those few cruel words, have forced me to re-examine every memory, every precious moment we've shared since Dawn's birth, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting back distorted versions of what I thought was our perfect life. Each memory now seems tainted, colored by the shadow of doubt his words cast. The man I've loved for 16 years, the father who once couldn't bear to be away from his daughter for more than a few hours, who would wake in panic if she was too quiet in her crib, now seems like a stranger wearing my husband's face, an imposter who has somehow replaced the loving partner I thought I knew. The silence between us since that day has been suffocating, thick with unspoken words and suppressed emotions that hang in the air like storm clouds ready to burst. I find myself lying awake at night, watching the moonlight paint shadows across his sleeping form, wondering how we drifted so far apart without me noticing. The distance between us in our bed feels like an ocean, vast and cold, and I'm drowning in questions I'm afraid to ask, choking on words I can't bring myself to say. Each night, I reach across that void, my fingers stopping just short of touching him, afraid that if I do, I'll find nothing but empty space where my husband used to be. My heart is being torn in two directions, ripped apart by competing loyalties that threaten to shatter me completely. On one side is my unwavering love for this man who has been my rock for so many years, my partner through countless storms, the keeper of my heart's deepest secrets. On the other is my fierce maternal instinct to protect Dawn from the pain of her father's rejection, to shield her from the hurt that gleams in his eyes when he looks at her now. The thought of divorce sends ice through my veins, freezing me in place. I can't imagine my life without him, can't bear the thought of our family splintering apart like a piece of fragile glass dropped on concrete. But watching my daughter's spirit dim a little more each time her father turns away from her, seeing the light fade from her eyes bit by bit, is slowly killing me inside, a death by 1,000 tiny cuts. I'm exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally drained to the point where even breathing feels like a monumental task. Every night, I fight back tears as I tuck Dawn into bed, praying she won't notice how my hands shake, how my voice catches when I tell her everything will be okay. During the day, I paste on a brave face, a mask so carefully constructed that sometimes I almost believe it myself. But inside, I'm screaming for help, my voice echoing in the hollow spaces of my heart, desperate for someone to throw me a lifeline before we all sink beneath these turbulent waters that threaten to drown us. What steps can I take to save my family from this slow-motion collapse? How do I bridge this growing chasm between my husband and our daughter before it becomes an unbridgeable abyss, a gulf so wide that no amount of love can span it? I need guidance, direction, anything to help me navigate through this storm without losing everything I hold dear. The weight of this responsibility, of trying to hold our family together with nothing but willpower and desperate hope, is crushing me beneath its mass. Yet I can't give up. not on my husband, not on our daughter, not on the life we've built together. There must be a way back to the love we once shared, a path through this darkness to the light I know still exists somewhere in his heart. Update, 2 days later. The universe works in mysterious ways, weaving patterns we can only see in retrospect. Since my last post, our world has shifted on its axis once again, but this time the movement is toward healing rather than hurt, toward light rather than darkness. We're now embarking on couples counseling, taking our first tentative steps toward recovery, and for the first time in what feels like an eternity, I can see rays of light breaking through the storm clouds that have been hovering over our family, casting shadows across our hearts. First, I want to express my deepest gratitude to everyone who reached out with advice and support, each of you a beacon of hope in my darkest hour. Your insights helped me understand the complexity of what we're facing, the intricate web of emotions and circumstances that had entangled us. One particularly enlightening podcast episode recommended by a commenter became a catalyst for change, opening my eyes to perspectives I hadn't considered. I hadn't expected such an outpouring of wisdom and compassion from strangers, but each comment helped illuminate the path forward, like stars guiding a lost sailor home. The day after my post, I spent hours meticulously planning how to approach my husband, crafting a mental script while caring for Dawn, who had stayed home from school with a fever. My thoughts were a tangled mess of words and emotions as I tried to find the perfect way to bridge the chasm between us. The universe, it seems, had its own plans, ones far better than my carefully constructed scenarios. Around midday, my phone lit up with my husband's name, something that hadn't happened during his lunch break in what felt like ages, a small miracle that made my heart skip a beat. His voice on the other end was barely above a whisper, raw and vulnerable in a way that made my heart clench with both pain and hope. He asked about my day, about what we needed, but beneath his simple words lay an ocean of unspoken emotion that threatened to overflow. I could hear tears in his voice, though he tried to hide them behind forced casualness, and each crack in his composure was like a fissure in the wall he'd built between us. We talked until his break ended, and while we didn't address our issues directly, something in that call felt different, like the first crack in a dam about to break, a harbinger of the flood of honesty and emotion that was to come. The real breakthrough came that evening, in the quiet hours after the world had settled into darkness. After tucking Dawn in with an extra tight hug and a whispered prayer, I found my husband in our bedroom, the blue light of the TV casting ethereal shadows across his face, making him look both familiar and strange at the same time. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to touch, as I joined him on our bed, this shared space that had lately felt more like a battlefield than a sanctuary. He wordlessly offered me a pillow for my back, a small gesture of care that made my throat tight with emotion. We sat in uncomfortable silence, watching but not really seeing the show playing before us, until he laid his head in my lap, a gesture of vulnerability that spoke volumes, reminding me of countless tender moments we'd shared in happier times. With trembling fingers, I stroked his hair, feeling the weight of unspoken words between us, heavy as lead yet fragile as spun glass. When I finally gathered the courage to pause the TV and suggest we talk, I felt him tense beneath my touch, his muscles coiling like springs. But instead of pulling away as I feared he would, he turned and buried his face against my stomach, clinging to me like a drowning man to a lifeline, his grip desperate and tight as if afraid I might disappear if he let go. What followed was the most raw, honest conversation of our marriage, a dialogue that stripped away every pretense and defense we'd built between us. I spoke first, my voice quavering like an autumn leaf in the wind as I laid bare my fears, my exhaustion, my worry for both him and Dawn. The words poured out of me like a river breaking through a dam, carrying years of concern and confusion. I felt his tears soaking through my shirt as I explained how his withdrawal was affecting our daughter, how his behavior could leave lasting scars on her young heart that no amount of time could fully heal. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible, choked with emotion that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. "I'm so sorry," he whispered against my shirt, his body trembling with silent sobs that shook us both. "I never wanted to hurt either of you." What followed was a flood of confessions that shattered my heart in an entirely new way, each revelation like a piece of a puzzle I hadn't known we were trying to solve. My husband, my strong, loving partner, had been drowning in a sea of isolation for years, fighting a battle I never knew existed. As an immigrant, he'd left behind not just his country, but his entire support system, uprooting himself from everything familiar to build a life with me. His relationship with his family cast long shadows over his heart, a distant father who had never shown him what it meant to be a loving parent, a cold mother whose approval always seemed just out of reach, and strained sibling relationships that left permanent scars on his soul. The only person he still occasionally speaks to is his younger sister, though even that connection is fragile for reasons he asked me to keep private, the pain evident in his voice as he spoke of their limited contact. The revelation that hit me hardest, that made me question my own role in his isolation, was about his complete lack of friends. Early in our relationship, he'd had two friends he'd met at a bar, a connection that seemed promising at first but turned toxic over time. These so-called friends had poisoned his mind with toxic suggestions about our age difference and his future, planting seeds of doubt that would later bloom into thorns of insecurity. When they later tried to push him toward infidelity, suggesting he have one last fling before fully committing to our marriage, it led to a near-physical confrontation that ended those friendships forever, leaving him more alone than ever. Since then, he's been unable to form new connections, trapped in a lonely bubble of work and family obligations, his social world shrinking until it contained only us. Through tears that seemed to carry years of buried pain, he confessed how he'd thrown himself completely into caring for Dawn and me, using exhaustion as a shield against his crushing loneliness. He poured every ounce of energy he had into being the perfect husband and father, hoping that if he kept moving, kept giving, he wouldn't have to face the emptiness inside. But eventually, the weight became too heavy to bear, the mask too difficult to maintain. He found himself spiraling into depression, haunted by his former friends' words about wasting his youth, and shamefully admitted to moments when he'd contemplated self-destructive behaviors, thoughts that terrified him enough to push them away. Only his determination to be strong for us and his deep-seated fear of following his family's pattern of alcoholism had kept him from that edge, though the struggle left him emotionally exhausted and increasingly withdrawn. That night, we held each other and cried together, years of unspoken pain flowing between us like a cleansing river, washing away the barriers we'd built between us. I promised to stand by him through whatever storms lay ahead, my words muffled against his chest but my conviction absolute. We made plans to seek professional help, both as a couple and individually, knowing that the road ahead would be challenging but worth every step. The weight of guilt I felt for not noticing his struggle earlier was overwhelming, a burden that threatened to crush me, but we both agreed to focus on healing rather than regret, on building a better future rather than dwelling on past oversights. The next day brought the first rays of hope, like sunshine after a long storm. My husband took a day off work, something he hadn't done in months, and we spent it reconnecting, bowling at the old alley where we'd had one of our first dates, sharing meals at our favorite cafe where the waitress still remembered our usual orders, and simply being present with each other in a way we hadn't been for years. The real magic happened when we picked up Dawn from school and went to the park. Watching them chase each other across the grass, hearing their laughter mingle in the afternoon air like music, I saw glimpses of the father he used to be, the joy that had been buried beneath layers of depression and isolation starting to break through. On the drive home, Dawn's excited declaration, "I'm so happy Papa loves me again," brought tears to my husband's eyes, each drop containing both joy and pain. The words hit him like an arrow to the heart, and I watched in the rearview mirror as he struggled to maintain his composure. Later that night, I overheard him in her room, his voice thick with emotion as he assured her of his endless love, promising that he had never stopped loving her, not for a single moment, that she was and always would be the greatest gift life had given him. As I write this, my husband is sleeping peacefully beside me, his gentle snoring a comforting symphony that fills our bedroom. His face, relaxed in sleep, looks younger somehow, unburdened by the weight he's carried for so long. We've planned a weekend getaway, a small step toward rebuilding our connection, and Dawn is thrilled about staying with her pool-equipped cousins. It's just a beginning, a tiny seed of hope, but I can feel it growing stronger with each passing moment, ready to bloom into something beautiful. To everyone who offered advice and support, you've done more than save a marriage, you've helped rescue a family from the brink of collapse. Your words of wisdom and compassion became the lifeline we needed when we were drowning in silence and misunderstanding. My husband, in a moment of lightness that reminded me of his old self, even joked about Reddit being cheaper than therapy, though we're definitely still pursuing professional help. His ability to find humor in our situation, even if just for a moment, feels like another small victory. If anyone else is facing similar struggles, please don't wait as long as we did to address them. The path to healing begins with honest conversation, no matter how difficult or painful it may seem. Sometimes the very words we're most afraid to speak are the ones that need to be said the most. The journey won't be easy, we're just at the beginning of ours, but every step toward understanding is worth the effort. Looking back, my only regret is not recognizing these issues sooner, not seeing the pain behind my husband's brave facade. But I'm choosing to focus on the future, on rebuilding our marriage stronger than ever, on helping my husband find his place in this country that's become his home, on creating a support system that extends beyond our immediate family. We're working on nurturing the beautiful family we've created together, understanding that love isn't just about the good times, but about walking through the darkness together until you find the light again. I'm grateful we found our way back to each other before it was too late, before the distance between us became too vast to bridge. Edit. My husband asked me to add something important about that morning he walked away from Dawn's story about her show. He was experiencing severe anxiety that day, his heart racing and vision blurring, feeling like he might pass out at any moment. The weight of his depression and isolation had become physically overwhelming. He's since apologized to her, explaining in age-appropriate terms that sometimes grown-ups can feel sick in their hearts just like children can feel sick in their tummies, and promised never to shut her out again. Our daughter, with her incredible capacity for forgiveness and understanding that sometimes leaves me in awe, hugged him tight and told him it was okay, that she would help make his heart feel better. Sometimes I think children understand more about healing than we adults do, their pure love untainted by the complications we create in our minds. Their simple wisdom often shows us the way forward when we've lost our path.